The story of the Jew who became a Nazi is one of the most perplexing and disturbing narratives to emerge from the dark history of the Third Reich. In the twisted ideology of Adolf Hitler's regime, anti-Semitism was not merely a policy, it was a central pillar of the Nazi worldview. To join or support such a movement as a Jewish person seems unthinkable, but history does record cases of individuals of Jewish origin who either supported or collaborated with the Nazi Party. One of the most infamous cases is that of Bernhard Rogge, a figure whose life and actions remain deeply controversial, as well as other individuals who, for a variety of reasons, chose paths that aligned them with the Nazi movement. The complexity of this phenomenon raises profound questions about identity, survival, loyalty, and betrayal. How could a person of Jewish heritage embrace or tolerate a movement dedicated to the destruction of the Jews? What motivated such individuals? The story of Jews who became Nazis or Nazi collaborators cannot be told through a simple lens of treachery or betrayal. It is a narrative full of contradictions, nuanced motivations, and tragic circumstances. Bernhard Rogge was not Jewish by religion, but his story is often associated with the phenomenon of Jews in Nazi ranks because of his part Jewish ancestry. Rogge was a decorated German naval officer who served during World War II and rose to the rank of vice admiral. His success and prominence in the Nazi military machine seemed contradictory, given his ancestry, as one of his grandparents was Jewish. Under the racial purity laws of the Third Reich, Rogge was classified as a Mischling, or a person of mixed Jewish and Aryan descent. Normally, such individuals faced severe discrimination and were barred from positions of power or influence within the Nazi state. However, Rogge's military prowess and loyalty to the Nazi regime granted him a special exemption from Hitler himself. In 1939, Adolf Hitler awarded Rogge the German Blood Certificate, a document that officially exempted him from the racial laws that would have otherwise ended his career. Rogge's achievements in the Kriegsmarine, or German Navy, were significant. He is best known for his role as the captain of the German auxiliary cruiser Atlantis, a ship that raided Allied shipping in the South Atlantic and Indian Oceans. His strategic brilliance and skillful command earned him several honors, including the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, one of Nazi Germany's highest military decorations. Rogge's legacy is complex because, on the one hand, he was undeniably a skilled officer, but on the other, his success within the Nazi military apparatus raises difficult questions about his relationship with the regime's anti-Semitism. Some historians have argued that Rogge's case illustrates the contradictions of Nazi racial policy. The regime's need for capable military leaders sometimes trumped its racial ideology, leading to special exemptions for individuals like Rogge. While his Jewish ancestry was a matter of public record, his loyalty to the German cause and his effectiveness as a commander allowed him to escape the persecution that many of his relatives undoubtedly faced. Yet Rogge never publicly renounced the Nazi Party or its racist policies, and his participation in the war effort makes him complicit in the broader crimes of the regime. Another example of a Jew who found himself in the inner circle of the Nazi Party is Emil Maurice, one of Adolf Hitler's early and close associates. Maurice was a founding member of the SS and Hitler's personal chauffeur and bodyguard. His influence on Hitler and his role in the early days of the Nazi movement were substantial. Maurice was of Jewish descent. His great-grandfather was Jewish, which made him vulnerable under the Nuremberg laws that classified individuals with Jewish ancestry as non-Aryan. Despite this, Maurice managed to maintain his position within the Nazi hierarchy. Hitler, who often exhibited a contradictory and pragmatic approach to his own racial ideology when it suited his personal relationships, granted Maurice an Aryan exemption. Maurice's loyalty to Hitler and his role in the early formation of the Nazi Party were evidently more important to the Führer than his racial purity. This exemption allowed Maurice to continue serving in the SS, despite his Jewish ancestry. Maurice's case highlights the capricious nature of Nazi racial policies. The party's leadership was willing to overlook its own racial laws when it served the needs of the movement or when personal loyalty to Hitler was involved. Maurice's continued service in the SS, an organization responsible for some of the worst atrocities of the Holocaust, cast a long shadow over his legacy. While he did not play a prominent role in the extermination of Jews, his association with the Nazi regime and his participation in its early activities implicates him in its crimes. Werner Goldberg presents another striking example of a person of Jewish descent who found themselves in service of the Nazi war machine. His story is particularly ironic because, despite his partial Jewish heritage, Goldberg was used by Nazi propaganda to represent the ideal German soldier. Goldberg's father was Jewish, making Werner a Mischling under Nazi racial laws. Nevertheless, he was conscripted into the Wehrmacht, the German army, during the early years of World War II. In 1939, a photograph of Goldberg in his German army uniform was published in a Nazi propaganda newspaper with the caption, "The Ideal German Soldier." At the time, the Wehrmacht had not yet fully enforced the racial policies that would later purge soldiers of Jewish ancestry from its ranks, so Goldberg was able to serve in the early stages of the war. His photograph, showcasing his blonde hair and Aryan features, became an iconic image in Nazi propaganda, promoting the notion of the perfect German warrior. Goldberg's military career, however, was cut short when the Wehrmacht finally enforced racial purity laws in 1940. Despite his service and the propaganda value he had provided, Goldberg was discharged from the army because of his Jewish ancestry. His story stands as a stark reminder of the arbitrary and hypocritical nature of Nazi racial ideology. Even those who fit the Aryan stereotype visually were not safe from persecution if they had Jewish heritage. After his discharge, Goldberg struggled with the realities of life under Nazi rule. His father, as a full Jew, faced increasing persecution, and Goldberg himself was marginalized. Despite this, he managed to survive the war, and after the conflict ended, he became a vocal critic of the Nazi regime. Goldberg's story highlights the contradictions within Nazi policy, as well as the personal tragedy of individuals caught between their identity and the expectations of the regime. The stories of Bernhard Rogge, Emil Maurice, and Werner Goldberg are not isolated examples. They are part of a broader and more troubling history of Jews who, for various reasons, found themselves serving the very regime that sought their destruction. In some cases, like that of Rogge, the individual's military skill and value to the regime allowed them to bypass the racial laws that would have otherwise condemned them. In other cases, such as Maurice and Goldberg, personal loyalty or propaganda needs granted them temporary reprieves from the full force of Nazi anti-Semitism. But beyond these individual cases, there were also Jews who, under duress or through opportunism, collaborated with the Nazis. In the ghettos of Eastern Europe, Jewish councils known as Judenrate were established by the Nazis to manage the Jewish population. The leaders of these councils were often faced with impossible choices: collaborate with the Nazis and try to protect their community, or refuse and face immediate extermination. Some members of the Judenrate became willing collaborators, aiding the Nazis in deporting Jews to concentration camps. Others, however, used their positions to resist and sabotage Nazi efforts, though they were often powerless to stop the tide of destruction. The phenomenon of Jews who became Nazis, Nazi supporters, or collaborators is a deeply troubling aspect of Holocaust history. These individuals were often driven by complex motivations: survival, ambition, loyalty, or coercion. In some cases, like that of Emil Maurice, personal loyalty to Hitler overcame racial ideology. In others, like Bernhard Rogge, the regime's need for capable military leaders allowed for temporary exceptions to its racial laws. For those who collaborated under duress, the choices were often agonizing, and their legacy remains controversial to this day.